Hi everybody, it's Kim from Patriot Garden, and today we're doing Canning 101. Now there are two types of canning you can do. You can do pressure canning or you can do water bath canning. It all depends on what foods you're processing. If your foods are very high in acid, like certain fruits, strawberries for instance, or you're doing jams or jellies or anything in vinegar like pickled beans or pickles, then you can use a water bath canner. If your foods are very low in acid, like meats or vegetables in water, you're going to need a pressure canner for that. Now I have used both a pressure canner and a pressure cooker, which you can see right over my shoulder, to process food. The difference with the pressure cooker is it doesn't have this gauge to show you the amount of pressure that you're working with. So if you have a pressure cooker and want to do some canning with that, I really highly suggest you Google a particular recipe with that particular pressure cooker, and it'll let you know what setting to put it on and for how long. It's going to be different than my pressure canner. If you're a beginner, water bath canning is the easiest thing to do because really all you need is a pan. You need a pan large enough so that whatever jar you're using can be completely submerged in water. I actually use this really big stock pot because it's got a really cool basket in there that I can use to lift my jars in and out with. I also have something between the jar and the bottom of the pan, such as a metal tray, and then just make sure the water is over the top of the jar. Pressure canning is a little bit more complicated. You are putting less water in the pot and you need to pay attention to the amount of water that's called for in your particular pressure canner. The object is to bring the food up to a certain amount of pressure measured by pounds and leave it at that pressure for a specific amount of time so that the jars are sealed and the food is processed. Now my pressure canner is a Presto pressure canner. All pressure canners work the same way. They have a locking lid and a seal on the inside. There is a pressure regulator here, and it also has this locking vent that when the pressure has been reached, pops up and stays up. Now the tricky thing about a pressure canner is you need to keep it at the required amount of pressure for the duration of the time that the food is being processed. So for instance, if your recipe says 10 pounds of pressure for 40 minutes, you need to keep this at 10 pounds, which means you can't set your pressure canner and walk away. You've got to make sure that it stays at 10 pounds by using the heat underneath the pan. I happen to have a gas stove and I have a gas burner for when I can outside, and so it's real easy to raise and lower the flame to adjust that pressure. If that pressure doesn't stay where it's supposed to be for the required amount of time, you can't be sure that your food processed correctly or that it's sealed correctly. When the processing is over, you wait for the lock valve to go down, and I even, using a pot holder, take my regulator off, make sure there's no steam before I attempt to unscrew the pot. Do not artificially try to depressurize your pressure canner. It might result in your glass jars breaking or cracking. Just let it depressurize normally, even if it takes 10, 15, or 20 minutes. Remember the lock valve down and no steam coming out of the top, and then your pressure gauge at 0, and it is safe to unlock and remove your lid. Now you're going to need jars. They come in cases of 12. You can buy half pint or pint. You can buy quart, and you can even buy half gallon size. I've never preserved food in half gallon size, but I do use it to store my dry goods in the kitchen in case maybe a mouse gets in. Now jars also come with a regular mouth or with a wide mouth. And usually people would choose the wide mouth if they were packing large chunks of vegetables or just wanted to make it easy. But I have to be honest, I process in jars indiscriminately. I use whatever's available. Now, in addition to jars, you're going to need lids and rings. When you buy your case of jars, each jar will have its own lid and its own ring, and the rings you can reuse, but the lids you can't reuse. So it's good to have a few boxes of each, and remember, lids also come in wide mouth and regular mouth, so make sure you have both if you have both size jars. Now I also keep these screw lids handy in the house. You can buy these anywhere online. I've bought them through Amazon and through other companies. They are handy when you open up a jar and break the seal, but you don't finish the contents of the jar. You can just put on a screw lid and it goes right into the refrigerator. Now the last bit of equipment sometimes comes in a kit called a canning kit, and sometimes you can buy them separately. It's real handy to have a funnel. A funnel will help you when you are pouring hot liquids into a jar. It will also keep the rim of that jar clean. It's important that one of the final steps is to wipe the rim of the jar clean and make sure that there's nothing stuck there that will impact the seal. You also need a jar puller. Now jar pullers are very important for when you're reaching into a pot of hot water and you want to pull out a jar or put a jar into a pot of boiling water. Now I don't know what this tool is called, but I know what it does. It removes the air bubbles with one end. Once you have packed your jar with your vegetables and your liquid, you just use this to remove some of the bubbles. The bubbles could cause that jar to crack or break during processing, and that is not a mess you want to deal with when you open up your pan. The other end of this tool will measure your headspace. Headspace is the difference between the rim of the jar and where you have the liquid filled. Different recipes will call for different amounts of headspace. Headspace is important, again, because you don't want your jar to overpressurize and crack or break during the processing. So this will measure, I think, 1/4 of an inch of headspace all the way up to 1.5 inches. You just rest the correct notch there, and then you know how far to put your liquid. Now there is another tool in there which, I'm sorry, I have completely lost. When you go to can, the one thing that is very, very important is that all of your canning supplies are clean, that your jars have been washed with hot soapy water, that your lids and your rings have been boiled, not only to clean them, but also to soften the red rubber on the inside so that it makes a really good seal. Now to get the lids out of that boiling water, I had a tool with a magnet on it that comes in the kit, but I can't find it. And you just use the magnet to pull the lids out. So I have, which is probably breaking the rules, touched the lids, but once they're clean, I only touch them on the very edge. I have already cleaned the lid of my jar. I put my sterilized lid on top. I put my sterilized ring around and just finger tighten and then process the jar. Once the jar is processed, you're going to want to remove that ring. It's not good to leave your jars on the shelf with the rings on. And I know that seems wrong to take the rings off, and the first time I did it I felt really strange doing it, but the ring can cause rust to build up and mold to build up under there, and you will not notice it until you go to open the jar, and you don't want that to happen. It also could impact the seal. Now how you know your jars are sealed is when you press into the center of them. They should not move. They should be sucked in, the vacuum should be complete, and that lid does not move. The best part about canning is when you take your jars out and they're still hot, as they cool, they start to pop and they sound like this. And once that pop happens, you know it's sealed. If the pop comes back up again and it's not sealed, and you've already processed it, the only thing you can do at that point is eat the food. You can't reprocess it because you're just cooking it again and you'll end up with a jar of mush. While your jars are being stored, it's always a good idea to occasionally go and check your seals and make sure all the seals are still good. Take down a wet cloth and make sure that your jars are kept clean. The food inside of here could develop botulism, and you don't want that to make your family sick. So keep an eye on your jars, date them on the top so you know how long they've been sitting there. I never plan on canning anything for use more than a year. Whatever I can in the summer, I anticipate using up completely before the next summer because I don't want to take the chance that what's inside is not safe for my family to eat. Now, before you get started, there's 2 more things I want to let you know. If you consult your state's Cooperative Extension, they will have a lot of good ideas on equipment and best practices for canning. Also, take a look at or purchase the Ball Canning and Preserving book. That is full of great recipes and, again, great best practices for canning so that your canning experience is a good one and your food is safe. If this video was helpful for you, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't already. There's more great canning videos to come. In fact, I'm getting ready to do a batch of dried beans, and I'll take you along with me. Until then, happy gardening.